Alright, so in this video, we're doing something a little bit different. It's not necessarily hunting or fishing, but it's related to hunting because we're talking about guns. This right here is my brand new rifle for the 2020 hunting season. This right here is the Browning X-Bolt Hell's Canyon Speed, chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor, and I have it topped with the Vortex Razor HD LHT 3-15 by 42 rifle scope. In this video, I'm going to walk you guys through how I had it set up from scratch all the way to what you guys see here, and then the result. If you want to figure out how I set this thing up, sighted it in, and did all that good stuff, you're about to find out. Dude, let's go, man. Dude, let's go. So the very first thing I did, which I didn't show, was check my rifle that it was unloaded, and I completely removed the bolt out of the rifle. That way there was no way that an accidental discharge was going to occur. After that, it's all about securely mounting your rifle onto some kind of platform. For my mounting platform, I simply used the Tipton gun vise. You could find this for $30 or $90 on Amazon, depending on which one you choose. So it's up to you, but for me, they all serve the same purpose, so I went with the cheapest one I could find. And then after that, I simply leveled my rifle. And in order to level your rifle, you have to find the flattest spot on your rifle. And for my Browning X-Bolt, it is right above the safety, the tank safety, and where your bolt would normally go. But since I removed my bolt, I can place this bubble right here. Since I know that that is the flattest spot on this rifle, it's simply a matter of just adjusting my rifle until that bubble level is perfectly centered. Once you have that rear bubble level onto your rifle and your rifle is leveled, simply add on the other bubble level. The first level and the level that you guys see on the screen right now is made by Wheeler Engineering, and it should come as a package of two. So it should come with a bubble level that I'm using right now and the first one that I set near the safety of my rifle. So since I know that my rifle is leveled because of that first bubble, now all I gotta do is secure this bubble level onto my barrel. Once we secure the front one, now we can simply just go back and look at both of the levelers from either the barrel side or the stock side, and you will be able to see whether or not they are perfectly aligned with each other. As you guys can see here, my rear one and my front bubble are perfectly leveled. The next step would to be simply attaching your rings or your Picatinny rail or your weaver. For this particular project, I went with a Picatinny rail, so the next step for me was to attach my Picatinny rail. According to Browning, you should not exceed 18 inch-pounds when you're torquing your screws. So on this one, I simply adjusted my torque wrench to right around 15 inch-pounds, and then I simply put on my Picatinny rail and torqued all the screws to spec. Now normally, if you torque everything to spec, you should not have a need for Loctite 242 or any type of thread locker. However, in the past, I have had the issue of screws unscrewing without me doing anything, even though they were torqued to spec. So for me, just based on past experiences, I do want a little bit more security, so I did add Loctite 242 to each of my screws when I was screwing in my Picatinny base. It simply allows for a much more secure base, because once that thread locker dries up, it holds those screws a little bit better in place versus not putting any type of thread locker. Again, generally speaking, if you torque everything to spec, your screws should not unscrew. But just because I'm going based off experience in the past, I went ahead and just added Loctite 242 on here. After I added my Picatinny rail onto my rifle, it was time to add on my rings. For the rings, I went with the Vortex Precision Matched rings, and these are the 30mm tube, or these rings are designed for 30mm tubes, and these are the low height or 0.87 inches high. Whenever you're buying a scope, make sure you buy the rings that are made for your scope. If your scope has a main tube of 1 inch, make sure you get the rings that are designed for 1 inch tubes. For example, my scope right here is the Vortex Razor HD LHT, which has a 30mm main tube. So I had to make sure that I bought the rings that were designed for a 30mm tube. If you have a 34mm tube, then you would have to get rings that are designed for a 34mm tube. The height of your rings will largely vary depending on how big your objective lens on your scope is, But the general rule of thumb is you always want your scope to be as close to your rifle as possible. For me, since I have the Picatinny rail mounted onto my scope, which further elevates my scope, and my scope is only a 42mm objective lens, then that means I want the low rings. So the next step was to add my rings. So before I even clamped my screws on my rings, I simply put the bottom piece of my rings onto the Picatinny rail, and then I put my scope on my rings. While my scope is still free floating essentially, I'm gonna check for eye relief. Eye relief is simply the required distance that your eye has to be from the rear lens of your scope in order for you to see a full and clear picture through your scope. If you have any of that black spots in your scope, that means that your scope is either too far forward or too far back. My method to check eye relief is to simply close both of my eyes and then just get the gun into a position where I would normally be when I'm getting ready to shoot. Once I am comfortable, I will simply open my right eye and I will look through the scope. Again, if the scope is too far forward or too far backward, you're not going to receive or you're not going to see a full and clear picture through your scope. So simply push your scope forward or push it back until you can achieve that perfect eye relief. Once you know where your eye relief is, you can now clamp on your ring bases. And for here, again, it's required between 45 to 50 inch-pounds. So I set my torque wrench right around 47 pounds and I simply screw the base of my rings onto my Picatinny rail. Once I have the bottom pieces of my rings clamped onto my Picatinny rail, I will simply place the scope back onto the rings right around that same position where I had achieved perfect eye relief. The next thing I did was I simply placed the top piece of the rings over its corresponding part. Don't screw in the top rings yet, because the next thing we have to do is we have to level the scope. Since our rifle is already leveled from earlier, we can use that bubble leveler on our barrel as a guide. So now I just simply place a leveler onto the top of my scope, which in this case is my elevation turret. The elevation turret is, generally speaking, not always a perfect spot to put a bubble leveler onto your scope, but for me, this method has never had an issue for me, so that's what I'm going with here. Once you have the leveler placed onto your scope, simply rotate your scope back and forth until the leveler on your scope and the leveler on your barrel or your rifle are perfectly aligned together. Once those two levels are aligned, you know that your scope is now perfectly aligned with your rifle, and now you can slowly and carefully screw on the top pieces of your rings. Again, like any other screw we've done so far, you have to torque these screws to specs. Vortex recommends right around 15 inch-pounds for these screws, but for these screws, again, I am using Loctite 242 thread locker on the screws. Vortex does not recommend using thread locker on these particular screws right here, but they do say that if you are going to use Loctite 242 or some type of thread locker on these screws, do not exceed 11 inch-pounds per screw. So I adjusted my torque wrench to right around 10.5 pounds, and that's what these screws are torqued to. They're all torqued evenly right around that 10.5 inch per pound mark. The last thing for me for this particular rifle is to add a bubble level. From all the bubble levelers that we have been using, those are just temporary ones. The one I am going to add will be permanent on my scope. It will be with me whenever I'm out hunting or whenever I'm out shooting. This bubble leveler will make sure that whenever I'm shooting, my rifle is always level and that my rifle is not canted left or right. If you have a canted rifle when you're shooting, in other words, meaning that your rifle is not perfectly vertical, your point of impact will actually be hitting left or right to your target depending on which way your rifle is canted. So having a bubble leveler as your guide on your actual scope will make sure that every time you're shooting, your rifle is perfectly vertical. Since we still have our levels on our rifle, you can use those bubble levelers as a guide when you are mounting your scope bubble leveler. Once I have the bubble leveler properly mounted onto my scope, my rifle is now ready to go shooting. I've now properly attached my Picatinny rail, I've properly attached my rings, I've properly mounted my scope, and now I've properly mounted that bubble leveler onto my scope. Today I'm out here with 3 different types of ammunition. I would have loved to have the Nosler AccuBond, the Barnes TTSX, and I believe there's another one but I forgot, but it's hard to find bullets right now, so these are the 3 I have. So we have the Barnes Vortex LR 127 grain bullet right here. We have the Sierra Gamechanger. This is a 130 grain bullet. And then right here we have the Hornady Precision Hunter Eldx 143 grain. So we're just gonna go through and see whichever one of these groups the tightest out of my 6.5 Creedmoor, and then that's gonna be the one I will be hunting with this year. So the first step for today is we have to just simply adjust the scope so that your bullets are hitting somewhere around where you're aiming. Prior to this, I haven't really shot my gun, so it's not sighted in at all. The closest thing I've done to actually sighting in my rifle was just simply bore sighting it. I am old school, so all I did was I took out my bolt, looked through the barrel, and tried to find some random object, and then just adjusted my scope so that my barrel and my scope were essentially looking at the same object. So it's not 100% accurate, but we're gonna shoot just about 2 shots, make it so that our rifle is shooting somewhere close to where we're aiming. And once we get that, then we'll go to figuring out what is the most accurate. So right now we're just gonna do a 2-shot group at 100 yards and we'll go on from there.
Did you shoot middle?
Yep. Just gonna shoot again.
Yeah, left up.
Yep.
Two inches left, 2 inches up.
So we were shooting about 3 inches left and 2 inches high. So all I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna adjust my scope to go down 2 inches. So we're gonna go down, which we will have to rotate this way. So no, it will be this way. So we would go down to 4.5. So now we went down 2 inches. And then we're gonna go to our windage turret, which is usually, if not all the time, always on the right side of your scope. And so right now we're gonna go 3 inches to the right. So if we go right, then we have to go this way. So we're gonna go right. So we're right at 4. So we're gonna go to 7 right there. Now the gun should be shooting somewhat in the middle, and now we can shoot our grouping process. So one of the biggest mistakes I see people do when they come out into a range like this is when they shoot, they just keep on shooting. What you want to do is every time you shoot your group, for example, like I'm going to be shooting 3-shot groups. Every time you shoot your 3-shot group, you always want to let your barrel rest and let your barrel cool down, because every single time you're firing a bullet, your barrel heats up. And if you're shooting like 10, 20, 30 bullets back to back, your barrel is going to be very, very hot, and what you're going to get is you're going to get very inconsistent results downrange. So always want to let your barrel cool down in between your shots or your groups. So after I did a 2-shot bore sighting test, I let my barrel cool down. My barrel is back to regular temperature now, and so we're going to shoot a 3-shot group. So we're just trying to see how much or how tight I can shoot these bullets. We're not necessarily looking to hit the bullseye yet. We're just looking to see which of these bullets right here will group the tightest. So after I shoot these 3-shot groups, I'm gonna let my barrel cool down, move on to my next one, and repeat that process. So I have 3 shots right here. I'm gonna throw in the magazine, and then I'm just gonna fire. I don't care where it hits. I'm just gonna keep shooting until I run out of these 3 bullets right here, and we're just gonna go and calculate how tight the group is. Some people like to do 5-shot groups, but I'm running a little low on ammo, so we're just gonna stick to 3-shot groups. So I made my adjustments on my scope. It should hit somewhere around where I'm aiming, and then we'll go on from there. So this is still at 100 yards. It's just now that we're shooting for our group. All right, so we waited about 15-20 minutes. My barrel is now cooled down after the Barnes group. So right now we're gonna move on to our second ammunition, and this one right here is the Sierra Gamechanger 3-shot group. Once again, 100 yards. We'll see how this one groups. So once again, it's been about 25 minutes. We let my barrel cool down. It's ready to shoot again. We're gonna be doing our 3rd shot group. This time we are shooting the 143 grain Hornady Eldx. This is the final group because this is all the ammunition I have. So we've shot the Barnes, we've shot the Sierra, and now we're shooting the Hornady. So once again, 100 yards, 3-shot group. We'll see how this one goes. All right, so I shot all my groups down on these 3 targets down here. So I shot from left to middle to right. And this first one right here, this is the Barnes LRX 127 grain. This is the Sierra Game King 130 grain. And then this right here is my last group with the Hornady Eldx 143 grains. And so just from judging by this group right here, the first place would definitely be the Sierra Game King. This is sub MOA grouping right here, which is good. The Barnes and the Hornady, they're in a tie for last place basically. They're right around that 1-inch mark, which for factory ammunition and for factory gun, 1 MOA at 100 yards is pretty good. It's not bad, but out of these 3 groups right here, you can definitely tell the Sierra Game King is the tightest group. We're gonna go with this one. We're gonna let the barrel cool down and we're gonna shoot a group again, just to confirm that it actually does shoot this type and I didn't just get lucky on the first group. So with that grouping, it's a pretty consistent group. So we're just gonna sight this rifle into the Sierra because I don't have a lot of time left here. So just based off that second group with the Sierra, we're gonna go up 1 MOA. So right now we're right at the 4.5 marker. So up, we would just go this way. So we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4 clicks, push it down, lock it. So now we would go right half MOA, which is just 2 clicks. So 1, 2, right there. I'm gonna let the barrel cool down and then shoot another group with a Sierra and confirm that it's zeroed, and then do a tracking test. So we know that this thing is shooting pretty much half MOA at this point, but the thing is I only have 1 box of these and I only have 8 shots left, and so I won't have enough to complete my tracking test. So instead of using that and not being able to finish a tracking test, I'm just gonna shoot the Barnes for my tracking test. Basically what a tracking test is, it's just a test to make sure that your scope tracks true. Basically, if I dial 1 MOA to the left, my bullet should move, or my point of impact should move one MOA to the left. If I go up 15 MOA, my bullet should hit 15 MOA up. You just want to confirm that, because when you're shooting long range, if you go up 15 MOA and you come back 15 MOA, but your scope only comes down 12 MOA, you're not going to hit where you're zeroing. So basically, we just want to make sure that our scope is shooting exactly how we're adjusting it. If we go up 15 MOA, our bullet should be hitting 15 MOA up. We come back 15 MOA down to where it's 0, it should hit where we zeroed our rifle. So right now we're gonna start a tracking test. 2-shot groups with about a 5-minute interval between the groups, because we don't have a lot of daylight left. But we just want enough information to tell me that the scope is tracking true. All right, so now we're gonna adjust our scope so that we can hit the top left target. So for that one, we're gonna go up 4 MOA. So right now we are at the 5.5. So we're gonna go up to the 9.5 marker, which is right here. So we just adjusted 4 MOA up. Now we need to go 4 MOA to the left. All right, so we just made our scope adjustments. Right now, I will still be aiming for the same exact 0 spot. I'm not changing where my middle crosshair is gonna be. I'm aiming at the same spot throughout this entire tracking test. The only thing that's gonna change is my scope and my point of impact. I will always be aiming at the same exact thing. That's the point of a tracking test. So this one, I adjusted 4 MOA left and 4 MOA up. I should hit that top left target, or at least close to it.
2 inches up.
So now we're gonna go 10 MOA down and then 8 MOA right. So we're gonna go down, so it would be this way. So we will go past the 0 and then 2 clicks, 1, 2. That's 10 MOA down, and now we have to go 8 MOA to the right. All right, so we just made our adjustments. Now we're gonna get ready to do the third part of our tracking test, or the third group. This time it should hit the bottom right target if this scope tracks true, which so far it has been tracking true. We'll find out. Still, the key point is I am still aiming at the exact same spot. I'm not changing where I'm aiming my crosshairs. The only thing that's changing is, again, my scope and my point of impact. So for our next tracking test, we're simply gonna go to the top right corner. So all we have to do is go up 10 MOA. So we're just gonna go back to 9.5 MOA, which is right there. That was a fire. You see what a hot barrel does?
Yeah.
I was pretty dead solid on that shot right there, but my barrel's burning. All right, just a quick interruption between our tracking test. So right now we're running out of daylight. And earlier I briefly went over the importance of letting your barrel cool down between your shots so that you give all the different ammunitions a fair chance of actually getting its best group. Right now, my barrel is hot. Like, it's hot because I'm not letting it rest long enough to the point where it cools back down to have what they call a cold bore, or a cold bore shot. And so right now, you guys can see my groups are starting to get wider, because that's essentially what happens when you're shooting a hot barrel. And so if you're just shooting constantly like what I'm doing here, and you're not letting your barrel cool down, don't expect to be hitting tight groups, okay? Right now, I know that my barrel is hot. Obviously, I can feel it. And so right now, even though my groups are a little bit further apart, I don't really care, because all I want to know is if my scope is like tracking true, which so far it has been, which is good. So with that being said, we're just gonna go back to shooting another 2-shot group, which now we're gonna adjust to the bottom left target. So to reach the bottom left target, we are going to go down 10 MOA and 8 MOA to the left, back to 2 clicks just past 0, which is right there. And then we're gonna go 8 MOA to the left. So right is that way, so we're gonna go back. So 1 MOA, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've done all the tracking so far. Now all we have to do is bring our scope back to our 0. So in order to do that, we have to go up 6 MOA and go to the right 4 MOA. So in order to go to 6, right now we're right at 14.5, which is negative 0.5. So we're just gonna go to 5.5. So that is 6 MOA right there. Now for our windage, we're gonna go 4 MOA to the right. So right now we are right at 4R. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 1 MOA. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 2 MOA. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 3 MOA. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 4 MOA right there. I believe that is a true tracking scope. So Vortex Razor HD LHT, thumbs up on the tracking. Been shooting all day. It's been a great shooter. Again, my barrel is burning hot, so I'm not surprised that I'm getting flyers here and there, but I think it's time to take it out to long range right now. So after I've zeroed my rifle with the Sierra Gamechangers in this case, the next thing for me to do is to set my zero stop. Now, some rifle scopes, especially lower end rifle scopes, don't have a zero stop. So a lot of times you can only find zero stops for higher end scopes, in which this case the Razor HD LHT does have a zero stop. For me, if I am planning to do any type of dialing, I always want a scope that has a solid zero stop. Now when you're talking about zero stops, there's all sorts of different systems that different manufacturers use. For this particular rifle scope, which is the Razor HD LHT, Vortex utilizes their Rev Stop Zero system. And right now I'm going to show you guys how simple and how easy it is to set your zero using the Rev Stop system made by Vortex. So as you guys can see on the top of this turret, you can see there's a little screw right here. So all we're going to do is we're just going to take a little nickel and we're just going to unscrew this. So basically you just need something so that you can unscrew this and just unscrew it until it comes out. So we pop this top piece out. Now we can pop this entire turret right here out as well. So you can see, now we don't really care which direction we pop it out yet, because that's the purpose of a zero stop system. Once you have this exposed, you're just going to take this ring that is provided by Vortex and you're just going to set this ring right into the little gap that is provided between this outer part and this inner part. And all we have to do now is follow the directions, which says rotate this inner ring until it can't rotate anymore. So we're going to rotate. Just going to keep rotating. Okay, so right now we can't rotate anymore. So right now what that means is our zero stop is officially in effect. So all we have to do now is we have to put this turret back on top. But as you guys can see here, this turret, it has a bunch of numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3. It goes all the way up to 14. And if you guys look right here, you guys can see a little dot. What you want to do is you want to align the zero marker with that dot right there. So we're gonna perfectly align this together. So as you guys can see, the zero marker is perfectly on top of that dot. What that means is this is our zero marker. If we are dialing up at 500 yards and we have to come back to a 100 yard zero, basically you just come back until your zero is completely lined up with that dot, and then you know that your gun will be hitting dead on at 100 yards or 200 yards depending on what your zero is. But for my case, which is a 100 yard zero, if I come back and my zero is hitting that dot, my gun is going to be hitting dead on at 100 yards. Once I have this in place, all we have to do is screw this top piece back on. So now that we have this piece back in here, our rifle is now officially zeroed with the proper marking. If we want to dial up, we simply pop this turret on top and we can dial. We just went up 1 MOA, 2 MOA, 3 MOA, 4 MOA. And if we want to go back to the zero, let's say you lost count. For the Vortex Razor HD LHT, they're going to allow you to go 1.25 MOA below your zero. So you guys can see right now it's not stuck at zero, but I can't turn this turret anymore. So all we have to do is go back up 1.25 MOA. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boom. Our rifle is back at zero. Now you might be like, well, what's the purpose of this? Let's just do this. Okay. I don't even know how many MOA I went up. But right now, you can see I overlapped my zero. But is this your zero right here? Or are you dialing 15 MOA up? The purpose of your zero stop is to make sure that you will always come back to your zero without having to shoot to confirm your zero again. So right now, this is actually not my zero, although it says zero. It's actually 15 MOA. So all we have to do is we have to go back down. Okay, now we lock back, go back to our zero, boom, our gun is zeroed. So now that we have our elevation turret set to our zero, we're going to do the same thing to our windage turret. So here, we're just gonna unscrew this cap. And as you can see, it's not perfectly 0 right now. We're actually at 7, at least the 7 marking right here. So all we're gonna do is the same process. We're just gonna unscrew this middle turret part right here. We're just gonna pop this open. Now the difference between your elevation turret and your windage turret is your windage turret does not have a 0 stop. The reason why the elevation turret has a 0 stop is because you are always compensating for gravity. So for elevation, gravity is a constant. Gravity is always pulling down one direction. But for windage, sometimes the wind is blowing left, sometimes the wind is blowing right. You never know which way the wind's gonna be blowing. That's why you don't have a specific 0 stop set for your windage turret. That's why you can see here, it says 1R, meaning you're gonna dial 1 MOA to the right, or you're gonna say 1L because you're gonna be dialing 1 MOA to the left. So that's why the windage turret doesn't have a 0 stop, but that's why the elevation turret does have a 0 stop. So all we're gonna do now is essentially the same process. This little dot right here, we're just gonna align with our 0 right here. So we're just gonna align it right about there. So our dot is aligned with our 0, and all we have to do now is just screw this cap back on, and then we're good to go. So right now, as you guys can see, our elevation turret and our windage turret is aligned with our dot at the 0 marker. So our elevation turret is at the 0, our windage turret is at the 0. I know that if my scope is in this position, my gun is dead on at 100 yards with the Sierra Gamechanger's 130 grain. If I ever have to dial up for a longer shot, say I have to go up 7 MOA, I can just always come back, hit the 0 stop, and then just come back 5 clicks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and know that my gun is back to 0 at 100 yards, and I can shoot at 100 yards with confidence, knowing that I will hit wherever I'm aiming. All we have to do now is just put a windage turret or a windage cap back over our turret, and our rifle is ready to go. So now my rifle is set up, and I can essentially just go out to the range and practice with it. I can shoot out to 300 yards, 500 yards, whatever. I would have ended this video shooting out to 1,000 yards, but unfortunately my target range did not allow me to shoot this rifle because of the ammunition I was using. So I can't really include that in the video. So I'm just gonna end this video here. Basically, with this season and how much practice I'm able to get in, I'm only gonna shoot up to about 300 yards, no more than that, because I haven't been able to shoot that far. So for 200 and 300 yard shots, I'm not gonna dial anything. I'm only gonna hold over. So for 300 yards, I will simply be holding about 10 inches above where I want my bullet to hit. At 200, I'm holding over about 3 inches above the spot where I want to hit. And then 100 yards, dead on. Again, I would have really loved to end this video shooting out to 1,000 yards, but the range didn't let me. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and good luck out there.